Hi everybody, it's Mr. Fossa. Hope you're having a good week. This week our lesson is focused on drawing a still life. I'm going to show you some examples of some still life paintings and arrangements and give you some advice on how to draw one. I hope you've watched already my slideshow, which gives you some detail about the history of still life and also some suggestions. If you haven't watched that, I would say pause the video now, go watch that slideshow, and then come back, and then we'll continue on. So today's lesson is a little tricky. It's definitely the most artsy of our lessons so far because we're not focused on, how to draw an object. We're really focused on how to make an interesting painting, like how to make the whole painting interesting. Not how to draw a pepper, not how to draw a grape, but how can we make the whole piece of paper interesting to look at, right? So like you see here, we're not focused on how to draw a lemon. We're focused on how can we make the whole picture interesting to look at. That's really what this lesson is about. What makes that tricky is there's really no one right way. It's not like there's a right way and a wrong way. There are lots of right ways, and there are lots of ways that don't work as well. So my job is to kind of give you some advice on how to be a little more, little more intentional on how to draw your still lifes. So for starters, you need to pick some objects, and we talked about that in the slideshow. Maybe you could pick some objects that are interesting to you. They could be maybe some objects that represent you or someone else. Like maybe it's your mom's tools, like a wrench and a hammer and stuff, or it could be your dad's like baking utensils or whatever. Or it could just be some things that your trophies and your dance shoes and things, or it could whatever objects are interesting to you. First of all, we want to pick some objects, and that's kind of one of the interesting things about still lifes, like I mentioned in the slideshow, is they were chosen on purpose. The objects weren't just sitting on the table by accident. The artist specifically picked them. Unlike, say, a landscape where the trees are where the trees are, and I get that an artist can maybe take out a tree or put in a tree or whatever. But in this case, it's very deliberate. The artist on purpose is placing things where they want them to go. So the question is, like, how do you place things in an interesting way so that the painting is interesting? I'm going to show you some mistakes. So kind of like for a starter, a mistake students make is the same kind of mistake we make when we draw a landscape, where we just draw like a line, right? And then which in this case might be the table, and then we start putting things on the table, like a bottle and an orange, or a vase, or whatever it is. And if everything's like all in a row sitting on this table, like on this line, it's just not very interesting. It's not a very interesting piece of artwork, because even if you draw this perfectly great bottle, there's all this empty space that really isn't doing anything. What we want is, for all of the space, like the entire space on the paper or on the canvas, to be interesting. I showed you that, or I drew to show you that, like, for example, if I were drawing, say, this bottle, that I found in my house, I might draw this perfectly great bottle, but it's still not a great piece of artwork because there's all this empty space, and it's just not a great example of a still life. And notice that even if I didn't draw a great bottle, like I made a lot of mistakes on it, they're kind of equal in that neither one of them is a very interesting piece of artwork. But if I were to take that bottle, and even I didn't draw it in a great way, it's like still crooked and stuff like that, but I drew the bottle, and then I started to think about the rest of the paper. Like, what else could I do? I could put an orange in front of the bottle. I could put another orange over here. I thought about where the table should go, like instead of just being a straight line across the bottom. I thought about what might be in the background. I thought about some patterns. I put a bush back here, And so what I'm trying to do is make the whole paper interesting. That's more like what a still life is about. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So hopefully you got some objects. My suggestion for you is, number one, start by placing your biggest object in the paper. Now, that's not what most of you want to do. Most of you want to draw a table. I'm going to say don't draw a table. Instead, think about your biggest object. And it could be a big object, like this bottle. even if it's not, like let's say it's a smaller object like this, it's okay if in your picture you make it bigger, you know, so we can change the scale of the objects so that they more fit the paper that we have. So what I'm doing at first is I'm just kind of sketching in where's my biggest object gonna go. And then, like in the slideshow, I want to remind you that the things that make still life interesting are things like an arrangement of like tall objects and short objects. So I might want to include things like an orange, you know, or an apple or something like that. And you'll notice that like it makes a difference if I put the orange over here versus if I put the orange here where it's covering the vase. You know, it's just a different thing, right? So you have to kind of like pay attention to where things are going to go. It does make a lot of sense to group together objects that are the same. So for example, if I have something like these 3 little clementines, I might want to put them on a plate. I want to think about how high and low things are. So let's just say instead of putting a clementine here, what I might do is I might draw a platter like that cake plate, right? And I might put the clementines, you know, sitting on there because I don't really need a low object right now. I need something that's a little bit higher. Maybe not as high as this one, but higher than this one. It's really important to think about overlapping shapes. And again, we have this tendency, we have a habit of putting everything side by side by side, because when we draw something, we love it and we don't want to cover it up. So we kind of put things side by side. But in a still life, we want to see, you know, is the pepper in front of the bowl? Is the pepper behind the bowl? Is the pepper next to the bowl? And overlapping and those kinds of things make a big difference. So when I go to draw, I might draw another shape like in front of this other shape, so I can see like this apple is in front of this apple, and this apple is in front of the vase, right? And so I'm just trying to see, you know, how those things compare. That's super important instead of putting things, you know, side by side by side by side by side. It's a great idea to balance, you know, tall and short and medium objects. I showed that in the slideshow, and notice that, for example, here, the orange was a low object, but I wanted to make it higher. So what I did was I put some books under it. Great book, by the way. Like, I think it should have won the Newbery Medal and also the Caldecott Medal. So if you're interested in reading, check out that book. It's a super, super good one. And Roald Dahl, you can't go wrong with him. But notice that, like, to make that orange higher, instead of putting it on the table, I put it on a couple of books, right? And that makes it like raised up, kind of like you see with this cake platter. Another idea is thinking about the part that's not the shapes, you know? So like, for example, if I'm gonna draw a picture and I want this orange in the picture, and then I want to put something else in the picture, well, that makes a really big difference. You know, like say I want to put this other piece, like do I put it next to that piece or do I put it over there? And the empty space in between is just as important as the pieces, you know? By the way, if you're going to do something with fruit or another food, cutting it or something that is important, because then it introduces sort of a sense of time, right? So if someone cut this, we need to eat this or else it's going to go bad. You know, there's like a story now, kind of, instead of just having oranges. And notice that it does make a difference. Like if I put, say, like that orange versus, you know, this one, right? And there's a peel taken off, and then, so where do I put that? Do I put it here? Would it be better if I put it there? Do I put it there? And how you arrange everything makes a really, really big difference in the finished still life. One thing that I think beginners forget is that the background matters just as much as the stuff. So see how I have all this empty space? That's kind of boring. What I want to do is I want to find some ways to make the background space interesting. One of those ways is to put in the table. Now, so like most people, you know, most beginners would put like a line across the bottom. That's a table. Notice it might be more interesting if once I've drawn my objects, if I put the table where I feel like my arrangement, you know, needs a line, right? So instead of just drawing a line across, I kind of place it where I think I want it to go. I still have too much empty space up here. And what you'll notice is putting something like, like some fabric, like you see here, or something in the wall, like these panels, or something in the distance, something back there makes it interesting. And even in a piece like this, where it's sort of sketchy, like even if it's like an object that you can't even really tell what it is, but it's just something that, makes the background a little more interesting, that's a really good idea. So it could be something like you maybe just put a line down, like that. Or maybe there's a window here. And we don't need all the details outside the window. This is a still life. I don't care about what's out the window right now, but just putting something there is a really good idea. And something, again, like a draped fabric, a curtain, or a tablecloth or something is super interesting. What you see here is a sketch, right? Notice that if you were timing me, it probably took me about 30 seconds, maybe like 45 seconds to draw. That's not the case with these paintings. These took a few hours to paint, but they start with a sketch. The best thing for you to do as a learner is to sketch and then say, okay, that was kind of fun. That took me 30 seconds. Now let me try a different sketch and see, does it, if I have these are my objects and I drew them this way, well, now what else could I do? I mean, would it be more interesting if the bottle was like this? Or what if it was like that, And can I put this up here, or could I just change it in some way? Maybe this is here and the books are like this. I'm just trying to see what are some ways that I can change the arrangement of the objects so that it's just a little more interesting. I would say do 2 or 3 or 5 sketches. Each one takes you like 30 seconds, like this. Then once you've done that, pick the one that seems the most interesting to you, and then you can work that into a more detailed still life. So what I might do is go, okay, that was my sketch, but now I'm going to go back and I'm going to, okay, this is really, I really want that to be. Here's where the edge of the vase is, and I'm just kind of making it a little more permanent. I think the mistake that we make as beginners is right from the start, we want to go, okay, I'm gonna use my observational drawing skills to make them like the most perfect orange. Oh, it's so good, right? It's gonna be this super perfect thing. And then no matter how perfect that is, the rest of the paper is still pretty boring. I would say sketch first, and then once you have your sketch set up, then go back and perfect the objects. That's really the way to go. Have some fun with this. Find some interesting objects, maybe, thinking about your life right now and what you spend your time doing, or things you want to remember from this time. It's kind of interesting to see that, if you make a still life now and then come back and look at it, 5 years later, it'll be kind of interesting to see what you chose. Pick some things that represent you. Maybe you want to pick some objects that represent or symbolize somebody else in your family, or one object for each person in your family, something like that. Have some fun sketching. Look back at the slideshow to remind yourself about some super, super key things like, tall objects, short objects, overlapping objects, so that they show that sense of distance. When things are closer to you, they're going to be lower on the page. That's kind of important. Thinking about the background and how those empty spaces are just as important as the objects themselves, and see what you can do. When you draw some things, please show them to me. Send them to me on our Google Classroom or my email, and I'd love to see what you do. Have a great time with this, and I hope you have a good week.